even our MEPs. We are not going to achieve Green Party policies through local government and through central government in time to make the difference that we all say is necessary. So I say support for getting councillors in, support for our MEPs and parliamentarians, but let's get this movement of change in the country, and that means us being involved in many other activities. So activists like Laura, who've got an intelligent, succinct way of giving the story about alternatives, essential. Will Duckworth, another fantastic example. Okay, who wants to take the microphone on the other side? Do you want to do timers for 2 minutes maximum? Anybody? Did I see someone? If I could just start with you here, we'll try and get some gender balance as well. So,
you ready? Don't start yet. Howard Thorpe, West Cheshire Green Party. Yeah, we've all grown up in a capitalist society, we live in a capitalist society, you switch on the radio, TV, what do you hear? You hear people talking about businesses, the private sector and markets. And I think one of the big humps that we've got to get over in this party and wider is that before capitalism you had a private sector, businesses and markets. And the problem is that people conflate those three things with capitalism. They're not the same. There were businesses in ancient Rome. If you'd gone up to a leading businessman in ancient Rome and said, "You're a capitalist, aren't you?" they wouldn't have known what you were talking about. So after capitalism, we can still have businesses, we can still have our local hairdressers who are the private sector, you know, local shops, all that kind of thing, and we will still have markets. So I think that's an important message that we've kind of got to get across to other people in the party, because they think that socialism means the end of those three things, and it doesn't necessarily mean the end of them at all.
Christine Clark, Thameside Green Party. We look at the resources that we were talking about in the earth, and there's the other resource, which is it's not provided by going through the capitalist system, it's not provided through the market. It's actually provided free of charge, mostly by women, and that's the only thing I want to get over, really. I was brought up in the 40s and 50s, and austerity really was there then, and we were taught, or we lived, the fact that you reuse, you recycle, you use up, or you do without, and that has to be part of what we feel and we do as part of who we are. And I agree about capitalism. I really am fearful when people spend so much money on solar power without really examining how much that is coming out of the earth, out of it. You know, it's still a capitalist society that is using the prerogative of green. That's it for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Tim Summers, Lambeth Green Party. Very pleased to be here and get the tone of it. I think the Green Party is becoming a socialist party, if I may say so. I've seen it over, I think now 14 years. When I first joined the Green Party, we used to say, neither left nor right but green, and smile smugly. It really used to get my goat, I tell you, some rows I had over that one. And you never hear it now, you don't hear it at all. There is a growing sense of the idea of state intervention for the urgencies of the ecology internationally. It just can't be done to a capitalist network. The actual regulating for ecology requires a strong state network. But of course we understand that social justice requires nationalisation of all the greedy banks that should be put to an entirely different social purpose. But if you were to take the long shot for socialist energy, water, transport, land, banks, primary industry, This would be a way to deal with social justice and with ecological saving the planet. And the only way, because capitalism, by its greed, it's innate, it won't change. And that it's not just an economic system, it's an ideology and a regime. And that the only way to get socialism is by revolution from below. And that I'm here to say that I'm not the least bit ashamed of my praise for Lenin, who delivered a bloodless revolution, for heaven's sake, except for that business at the Winter Palace, where the constitutional democrats did this token resistance, which I regret. It was a futile gesture. I'm sorry it happened. But nevertheless, Red October was a plan. That in itself was socialist planning. The revolution was socialist planning, and look what they did afterwards, before Stalin gummed the whole thing up. That should be our lesson and our crusade in the Green Party. Thank you.
Anyone from this side?
Hello, my name is Gordon Peters. I'm R&D Green Party. My question is about our means and ends, which I think you alluded to a bit. I've been a lifelong socialist for a good number of decades, trade unionist, and I think eco-socialist as well. One of the conflicts or contradictions which one's faced with all the time nowadays is that we defend the health service, the welfare state, which is a social democratic gain, I suppose, but it's a difficult thing to defend sometimes, things within it, the way it's organised. It was top down. And the interesting thing about the current situation is that it seems to me there's a danger we have to face, which is the right in the world, in this world, which is coming up with a lot of the new ideas, often horrendous new ideas, about privatisation and worse. On the left, there's an interesting difficulty for us in that we're often defending the difficult to defend top-down institutions, a notion of socialism with a big S, which we have to face a lot of the world is alienated from. So how do we deal with that? I think means and ends are interconnected. I think as soon as you divorce the means by which you try to change from the ends you're going towards, you are in big trouble. And history teaches us that. So I think my question is, what do we on the radical, ecological, libertarian, socialist left, all of which I think I am, what do we do about the difficult institutions which are broken, which we are trying to defend, because the monetarist world is trying to abolish them, and it will within a generation. How far do we need to go? I think a lot more than we've done so far in putting out there the other ways of operating, taking the lead from people like the occupiers in the way in which we actually organise ourselves. I think the Green Party does have a tradition in this. We need to ally that with our socialist tradition much more forcefully.
Thank you very much. It just reminded me of Ursula Le Guin, one of her sci-fi novels, and they were talking about whether it's justified to do this or that, and they said, well, what if there are no ends? You know, so is it a means to an end? What if there are no ends? Then you've only got your means, and I think Greens have probably got a better chance at sorting that.
Jim McGinley, World Green Party. As far as getting there is concerned, I think it must be absolutely clear that we can't adopt simply an electoral strategy, not in a country which is being destroyed in terms of basic civilized values, and where people are fighting back across a whole range of issues. On the NHS, for instance, you know, in every corner of the country there are meetings continually about how to fight off privatisation. On the bedroom tax, there are, within a radius of 5 miles of Liverpool alone, 30 or so anti-bedroom tax groups fighting to beat the bedroom tax, to bury it, and determined to do so, and confident that they can. There are groups fighting the welfare cuts in every way. On the Wirral itself, we've had a Wirral Save Our Services meeting late last year. I'm not sure why it's not called a People's Assembly, but at that meeting, bringing in activists from trade unions, from community groups, from the Green Party, from the Labour Party, but I'll say a quick word about that in a moment. Considering that meeting, that conference, considered how to fight on the NHS, how to fight welfare bills, how to fight on the bedroom tax, and there was a political debate involving the Labour Party, Left Unity, Tusk, and the Green Party. And that meeting is an indication of people's search for alternatives. We will forge an alternative by building such meetings as those through the People's Assembly. Electoral emphasis we have to have. I think we have to have that target to win. I believe in that. But it has to be allied to campaigning with these organisations, building our support in those organisations, drawing them towards us, making them realise that we have the policies and we have the electoral know-how and the strategy to implement the policies that they actually support. Can I just say that the Labour Party doesn't come out well in that kind of debate, and that is a huge opportunity for us because there is no alternative.
Can I just say, you can just affiliate under your own name. We don't insist on people changing their names, so that's fine. Do you want to choose someone on this side there, this side?
Roy Sanderson of the Green Party. I didn't know it was so common good before I got here today, but I found it really good. It reminds me of the Commonwealth Party of the 1940s. And it's that commonalities that it's about really, it's like community, etc. I think it's a really good progressive step forward. In terms of the, I joined the Labour Party when I was 15, and I'd argue for things like nationalisation of the top 200 monopolies under control 85% of the economy under workers' control.
Why do you stop?
I still believe that, but I think the number of companies that run the economy is probably smaller now. But I think what's interesting is that, as the comrade said earlier, I think the discussion about how we're going to run society and how we're going to change societies, the Green Party can have a big input now because things are changing, the dynamics are changing, and we can actually look at different ways to running and democratising the ideas of workers controlling the industries, etc., and the communities controlling the industries. And I think the Green Party can contribute to that idea. To one important point, in 2000, in 1990, after the European elections, when we got 15%, the Green Party was virtually taken over by the likes of Jonathan Pollitt and Sarah Parkin under the idea that there would be a massive push towards electorism and everything was about elections. They almost destroyed the Labour Party in 1992 election because we didn't give the breakthrough, etc. And it was the left at the time who actually kept the party going. They resigned. They actually bogged off and left the party. Now that's the problem. If you think that the election is the only way forward, then that doesn't work, particularly in a system without PR. The other point is, are we going to wait 30, 40 years to get a Green government or a Green council? Because that's the reality of the situation and a target to win, as some people do argue. It's got to be part of the struggle. It's about professionalising the party in terms of elections. No problem at all. Towards the Labour, Liberals all do that, but it's got to be a part of the 50-50%, i.e. time to win and campaigning. And don't worry about time to win, but make sure it's part of the overall attraction of the party.
Thank you very much, Roy. I saw one figure where it might take us 240 years to have a majority in Parliament.
I really want to ask a question, and it's linked back to the austerity and climate change link, and really ask if people could help me unpick a bit what Laura referred to as the link between between the two. And I asked this because on the train down, I got into a fairly heated conversation with 3 other Green Party members about what being a socialist Green meant. And they said, their line was, I'm not a socialist because I don't believe in growth. So they see it's kind of going, well, I don't think there's any point laughing at it, because actually it's going back to, it is going back to Marx and Lenin, a socialist tradition, and it is a strong link with growth, and I think we do have to recognise that, and we have to unpick that connection very seriously, and I can't do it by myself, so I want some help with that.
Well, you can have another go later. Can I just say, I've just come back from a meeting in Paris where there's a European network being built between various people, including the Polish Greens. Perhaps the Norwegian Greens will meet us at the next meeting. Keith Taylor said he was interested but couldn't quite make it this time at their next meeting. But it is a European eco-socialist network. I was invited out to Bordeaux as an international delegate last year because of Green Left, because they knew that we declared ourselves, sometimes quite quietly, as eco-socialists. And they had spent over a year going around through the members of their party, the Parti de Gauche. Mélenchon got, was it 4 million votes in the presidential election? Couldn't win, but even so, there was a massive surge of support for him. But their party is roughly the same size as ours, and they have a little bit more money coming in. But they went round the party and they debated and discussed, and I was at their Bordeaux conference where they debated all the minutiae of the policies, and they declared themselves from that point on to be an eco-socialist party. So that's the bit, the new bit, the eco-green socialist that knocks on the head productivism, and they've got all sorts of very funny terms that don't translate very well into English, but basically it's not to be consumerist productivist and to look at everything at with a green standard, not a gold standard. But anyway, we can come back to that later. Perhaps anybody else on this side? We'll try and get everyone in.
Hi, it's Malcolm Bailey from Luton. I think one of the important aspects of a socialist society is local democratic accountability. And there's been a sort of trend away from that. So I'd just like to very briefly illustrate it by a sort of a mini case study in the education sphere, from where I come from, which is Luton. Because we used to have things called local education authorities, which were largely elected and accountable locally, running the education system in their area. And that they still exist, but they're being stripped of gradually under Labour governments, Tory governments, Condems. They've been stripped of effective powers. Until now, they're just a sort of a shadow of what they used to be. And just to illustrate what this can lead to, detrimentally in terms of local education provision. In Luton, we used to have a further education college called Barnfield College, and it was local governors. It was run very effectively, an excellent reputation, run by the local education authority, and schools similarly under the remit of the local education authority. But then, under the Tories and Labour, powers of local education authorities, AAs, were gradually stripped away and downgraded. And this Barnfield College, which is just about a quarter of a mile down the road from where I live, that opted out of the LEA, so started to go independent. And they got chief executives in who were very entrepreneurial minded. And as soon as the Academies programme and free school programme kicked off under Labour, this Barnfield College started to become very predatory, if you like, and they started picking off local schools to become part of their, through the academy route, to become part of what they call the Barnfield Federation. First 1, then 2, then 3 and 4. They were secondary schools. Then they started to go into the primary sector, and they got a local private primary school, brought it into a new build on their site, and through the free school route. And this Barnfield Federation, as they call themselves, they were taken over by a guy, chief executive, Sir Peter Burgett, and all sorts of problems started to arise. The governing body was not representative of local people. They started talking about selling playing fields off. That was only stopped by a massive local campaign which just stopped them in their tracks. And they also tried to reduce the conditions and services of staff, and so on, provoked a strike. Anyway, just to cut it short, where we are now is that Sir Peter Burgett disappears. A whistleblower has shown that there's terrible management problems. £1 million claimed from the government for teaching pupils who do not exist. Massaging grades, the chief executive disappeared, and now the whole file has been handed over to the police. That's what happens when you, in fact, take away local democratic accountability.
I wonder, if you're keen for workers to have control of the means of production, does that also apply to education workers, health service workers, and others in the public sector? Because if we were to sell off the public property to perhaps a real estate investment trust run for the benefit of these groups gradually, it could do rather a lot to solve the public national debt problem, and as well as which it would give these good people rather more identification with the institutions for which they are working. Just a thought.
Lovely brief. Any more of those? This side? Do you want to go yourself?
Merlin Drake, co-digger. We talk a lot about electioneering versus campaigning, but both of those things are going to take far longer than what we really need to save the planet, the world, society. We're all socialists here, I assume. So my proposition is that we band together with a handful of our friends, fellow socialists, and start some kind of micro-collectivization. Band together your powers, our powers, resources, on a tiny scale, because it's no use waiting for a revolution or for an elected revolution as when we get into number 10. We have to start acting today, now. Just pick whatever area you think you can make a difference in. Pool your resources and start doing things. If only as an example of the power of collective action. That's my thoughts.
A sort of transition town type idea. I know myself, I can often be at a rally, and if someone doesn't shove the microphone even into my face, I don't say, oh, come on, I'll say something then. I don't do it. So I know there's lots of women here with lots of ideas. You may not want to share them today, but please, do think, you can say something short or just go on and expand. If you have a think about that while we have our next contributor.
Gordon Best from the Green Party. What I'm going to say, I think, might start off sounding cynical, but it isn't. I hope when I get to my two questions, you'll see it isn't. But I've been going to meetings now for over 4 decades, where the language being used and the demands being made were very similar to our opening speakers and many of the members of the audience. It started in the days when the IS and the IMG and the SWP were deciding who's going to be the vanguard that led the revolution. And more recently, it was the Benite tendency and the briefing tendency within the Labour Party, and then the Labour Representation Committee under the Labour MP, John McConnell, and now Left Unity. And the language is the same, the demands are the same. And I have found this a very depressing 4 decades, because I support most of those ideas. And there's a complete record of failure. Most of those organizations have disappeared, and the ones that haven't show no signs of success, as far as I can see. So I want to put 2 questions to our panel. One is, what is it that's distinctive or unique about the Green Party's approach to these issues, which means that we're going to be more likely to succeed where they have all failed? And if there is something distinctive and unique, shouldn't we be hounding on about that and publicising that, rather than just using the old language that's got such a bad record of failure.
Thank you very much. We haven't had many questions, that's good. I would say it is in our manifesto that we don't profess to have all the answers. I think that can make us very attractive to working with a lot of people who aren't into politics at all yet. So maybe that's the way.
Hi, my name's Julie Birchall from Liverpool Green Party, but I was also born in Barnsley, and I actually grew up before when Natalie referred to the miners' strike, during the miners' strike, and at first I thought about joining the Labour Party, but then I looked closely at the policies of the Green Party and saw that, you know, the policies to me actually seem more socialist than definitely more socialist than the Labour Party. But I think as a party we need to get across our other policies and much more to ordinary people besides our environmental policies, and like you said, connect with people on the ground level, because I think sometimes we can be viewed as very much like a very middle class, educated section of people, and I think we need to bring in more people from different walks of life, maybe by putting forward you know, the socialist ideas that we've got, because I think some people, you know, especially for example in the Barnsley area, just view socialism as being the Labour Party, and I think we really want to put out that, you know, we too have a socialist agenda as well. Thank you.
Is it time for us to answer a few of the questions?
Yeah, okay, you can. I told you you were allowed to interrupt.
Yeah. I've got quite a list. I've made a few notes. Starting with the target to win, I got elected as deputy leader partly on the idea that I would spread the target to win message, which I have been doing. And there are some people, but very, very few, who actually believe that is the only way forward. I do a lot of other campaigning. I've spoken at a number of people's assembly meetings, and certainly target to win is not going to get us elected on its own. It's not going to get us into power on its own. It's not going to save the planet and save the world on its own. We do need campaigning. It's vital. So anyone who thinks just because I sort of headed the target to win campaign in a number of ways doesn't mean I believe it's the only thing. The growth agenda, I was actually chairing the political committee a few months ago when it was brought up and pointed out to all of our major spokespeople that they must not talk about growth. They must not talk about economic